Saparvata Terrace, Divine Grace. A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. ISKCON BBT Founder Acharyas Divine Grace Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Ananta Koti Vaishnava Ki Jai. Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur Ki Jai. Praise to Co Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Gopinath Shamasundar Radhakundan Giri Govardhan Ki Jai. Shrimati Tulsi Devi Bhakti Devi Vrindamayi Ki Jai. Shri Navadik Dham Shri Mayapur Dham Ki Jai. Shri Jagannath Puri Nilachala Kshetra Ki Jai. Shri Mathura Dham Ki Jai. Shri Vrindavan Dham Ki Jai. Shri Holy Name Mahamantra Hare Krishna Mahamantra Ki Jai. Shri Sankirtan Yuga Dharma Ki Jai. Gaur Premanandi Hari Hari Bol. All glories, all glories, all glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the lotus feet of Sri Guru and Sri Gauranga. So, can we flip this microphone on this side? Keep the cord around the back so people aren't tripping on it. When you're having the vision, you're not going to have the whole mic thing in the face. And this little space is not so used, so more people can fit in. So the Virgo has spoken. So Hare Krishna, thank you all for coming out in the not so beautiful weather. I just drove up from Cincinnati. And it was just, but then I was thinking, okay, it's pretty bad, but it's not a tornado, so it's okay. So I want to speak about a hometown saint, a person who was actually born in Ohio, April of '39. And graduated right across the street, Ohio State University, engineering degree. And he wasn't finding, maybe can we tell him to tone down the noise or close the door? I don't know what, but we shouldn't have to compete with the kitchen. Graduated with an engineering degree. He left this world in May of '77, May 1st, actually of '77, to give some context to the dates. Actually, on June 1st of 1967, yesterday was June 1st, June 1st of 1967, His Divine Grace Srila Prabhupada was in New York, and he had a very unexpected, of course nobody expects a heart attack. And he was taken by ambulance to Beth Israel Hospital. And while he was in the hospital, he could see the treatment, there wasn't a treatment. In his own words, they were simply sticking me with needles and taking blood. So he wanted to get out of there. And the doctors were adamant that he shouldn't leave. But one of the young disciples, Gargamuni Prabhu, found a white coat. The doctors put that coat on, took a gurney, on the wheels, took Srila Prabhupada down, out, into a taxi, liberated from the hospital. So he left in November of 77. Jayananda Prabhu left in May of 77. And when he departed, it was May 1st, so on May 5th, Srila Prabhupada wrote a letter to him post-departure from Bombay. He said, "My dear Jayananda Prabhu, please accept my blessings. I'm feeling very intensely your separation. Since 1967, you joined me in San Francisco. You were driving my car and chanting Hare Krishna. You were the first man to give some contribution for printing my Bhagavad Gita. After that, you have rendered very favorable service to Krishna in different ways. I so hope at the time of your death you were remembering Krishna, and as such, you have been promoted to the eternal association of Krishna. If not, if you had any tender material desire, you have gone to the celestial kingdom to live with the demigods for many thousands of years and enjoy the most opulent life of material existence. And from there, you can promote yourself to the spiritual world. But even if one fails to promote himself to the spiritual world at the time he comes down again to the surface of this globe and takes birth in a big family like yogis or brahmanas, our aristocratic family, where there is again a chance for reviving Krishna consciousness. But as you are hearing Krishna Kirtan, I'm sure that you are directly promoted to Krishna Loka. His departure was right in the midst of Mongol Arti, and it was being broadcast to his room. It was in LA. Then he quoted Janma Karma Tame Divyam Evam Yovita Ditatva Tvakta Dehem Parnar Janma Narite Mamiti Sorajuna, Bhagavad Gita 4:9. And then he gave the last sentence, very instructive for all of us. Basically, this letter was written for all of us because he had departed. Krishna has done a great favor to you not to continue your diseased body and has given you a suitable place for your service. Thank you very much. Your ever well-wisher, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami. So after the disappearance of Jayananda on May 1st, 1977, His Divine Grace Srila Prabhupada instructed devotees all over the world to commemorate the event every year as they would any great Vaishnava disappearance day. And as was mentioned, his photo was then requested by Srila Prabhupada to put on the Rath Yatra card every year. Many of you see the picture of this person, you have no clue, who's this person? So I want to speak a little about this personality. Going back to this comment, Krishna has done a very great favor to you not to continue your diseased body. You know, how many times is there somebody at the, as Prabhupada would say, the fag end of life? You know, tubes everywhere. And still the relatives and even devotees will pray, just don't go, don't go. Okay, they don't go, but at what cost? You know. So the great favor Krishna gave to Jayananda, because his condition was irreversible, was not to continue the diseased body. And because of he has rendered so much favorable service in Krishna consciousness, then he said, Krishna has given you a suitable place for your service. In other words, there's never any loss of diminution in taking up this process of Krishna consciousness. So Jayananda, he was like the all-American boy. He was handsome, strong, tall, intelligent, born in upper middle class family here in Ohio. His name was Jim Core. So he took a degree in mechanical engineering right across the street, OSU, and then he ended up driving a taxi cab in San Francisco. This is in the mid-60s when the whole hippie era was in full swing. One time, Karandar, who was a very important personality in the development of our Krishna consciousness movement, he asked him why he didn't get a better paying job. And he just said, I don't fit in with the upper class crowd. He was very introspective by nature. But he just felt very empty and unsatisfied during his college years. And he would often say that before joining Krishna consciousness, he was never happy. In fact, it got to the point he was in depression, and he was actually almost feeling suicidal. And then he read a small article in a San Francisco newspaper talking about an Indian Swami who had come to the Bay Area to propagate the chanting of God's names. So Jayananda read that, and he just felt this ray of hope. I have a deity. It's reminding me that it's time for Gayatri. Sorry. I thought I shut those reminders off. So he read this, and in his words, he felt a ray of hope when he read that article. So he was thinking, maybe this Swami has something to offer. So he made up his mind he was going to attend one of the Swami's lectures. So in the early days, the temples were quite small. And at this point, there was only 2 temples, San Francisco and New York. New York was the first one, then San Francisco. And so we would get these small storefronts. Prabhupada was asked, why do you start out in these storefronts? And he said, because we can afford them, because they were inexpensive. And because they were a storefront, there would be a big window. So people could look in, we could also look out. So I remember looking out, and I'm seeing this taxi cab pulls up, so I'm thinking, wow, somebody's actually taking a taxi to come here, see what's going on. But then the driver got out, and he's looking in the window. So then Mukunda went outside to invite him to come in. And then he started attending our Sunday Feast programs. And he wanted to contribute something, and he saw everybody was like cooking, they were bringing things, so he offered he could make something. So we told him, yeah, what the conditions were. And he started bringing these little things, he called them pecan sandies, but we would probably know them as Mexican wedding cakes or wedding cookies, little round things with powdered sugar on the top. They kind of melt in your mouth. So he was bringing those. And then later, there was an apartment vacated in the building where Janaki and Mukunda lived. And he got that apartment. And that apartment was on Ashbury Street, and it was just up the road from myself and Shamsundar. So we were on the same street, and there was another apartment building. And actually, myself and Shamsundar, by Krishna's arrangement, I guess, because we found there was an empty apartment, but we also found that that apartment manager was leaving the country to go to England, where we'd be going ourselves the following year, but they needed an apartment manager. So we applied and we got that role, which meant we got a free apartment. It was very nice. It was a nice building, We were kind of used to living in not so nice place. Suddenly we had a nice place. And right across the street from us, there was what was known locally as the Dead House, which wasn't as drastic as it sounds. There was a very famous rock and roll band from America called the Grateful Dead. So like in England you had the Beatles, and America had the Grateful Dead. So they didn't get as big or as popular as the Beatles, but to this day you have people that are known as Deadheads. That's what you call the follower of this band. So they were our across the street neighbors. And in fact, they did some nice service also for the temple. Because I was over in their house one day and I noticed they had this really big stove and it had a huge griddle on it. And I'm thinking, wow, chapatis. You can make a whole lot at one time. And I knew they didn't really cook. So I said, hey, can we borrow this? Can we borrow your stove? And they agreed. So somehow we got it down the stairs and got it over to the temple. And then there was, like, to get it in the back of the temple, there was already, you wouldn't get it through the door, but there was a space that had to be made a little larger to get it in the back of the temple. And then when Lord Jagannath came, that space was closed up because Lord Jagannath was above that space at the time. And after we went to England, we get a phone call one day, hey, there's these people here from the dead house, and they say you borrowed the stove, but now they want it back. I said, well, that's true. It was loaned to us. But of course they couldn't get it out now without, knocking apart the wall, and then there's Jagannath up there. So they looked at the situation, they go, well, I guess you got yourself a stove. Anyway, Jayananda, he just was such a caring and observant person. If he saw something wasn't quite right, he didn't just shrug his shoulders, he didn't go tell somebody else. He did what Prabhupada taught us to do the needful. He would do it. If there was something wrong or broken in the temple, he would take care of it, particularly the cars, but plumbing cars. You could find him always, if somebody was looking for him, just go out and look at the cars, and if you see two legs sticking out from underneath, that would be Jayananda. Yeah. And Prabhupada knew, he always knew that Jayananda was behind the scenes, making things work, fixing things. And one time when Prabhupada was lecturing, Jayananda walked in. Now you may say, why wasn't he there in the beginning? Because he was out taking care of something. So Jayananda walks in and Prabhupada goes, oh, the Goswami has arrived. Another time, the same thing, he goes, oh, Jayananda, he comes in. Jayananda looks just like Lord Chaitanya, big, strong man, big shoulders. So he had inherited $5,000. And he offered it to Srila Prabhupada. And it was the first significant financial donation. But initially, Srila Prabhupada refused to accept it. He goes, you will need some money, you should keep it. And Jayananda replied, I wouldn't know how to use it, but I know you would. So Prabhupada accepted. And it went toward the first edition of Bhagavad Gita as it is. It wouldn't have been published as soon as it was had it not been for that donation. Another aspect of Jayananda was that maybe there's a big move because more people are coming in and it's getting smooshed back there. So if y'all could just fill up the space here, then the people coming in later will not be so smushed up. So he knew how to attract people with Krishna conscious prasadam. In other words, with prasadam. That was we call it the prasadam weapon. Just like Prabhupada would keep this jar of gulab jamuns by his desk, and his desk would just be a small trunk, and he'd be sitting on the floor behind it. But he would keep them there, and we would call them ISKCON bullets. And I think nowadays we would not maybe use that terminology. Somebody would definitely get triggered. But the bullets were there, these juicy, drippy, sugary gulab jamuns, if you were having a crisis or just felt a little hungry, you could always go get one. So he knew about the effect of prasadam. So when a new devotee would come, Jayananda would see to it that he was sumptuously fed with prasadam, and in those days prasadam was early top class. And I honestly wish everybody would get this first edition of the Hare Krishna cookbook. It is available on Amazon. And follow those recipes, because these were Prabhupada's recipes compiled by two devotee ladies. And if you follow those recipes, you will find yourself amazed at how delicious Prabhupada's prasadam was in those days. It was wonderful. So Jayananda would see that they would get, sumptuously fed. And we had the saying in those days, up to your neck. You just eat till you're up to your neck. And of course, he was also able to honor quite large quantities of prasadam any time of the day or night. And he was a kind of devotee. He could come up to you at 10 o'clock at night. You might even be sleeping. And he'd go, hey, Prabhu, check this out. And he'd hand you some peanut butter halwa. So I mentioned this name, Karandar. It's nice to know these early devotees, the people who put in the labor to put the bricks in that built up this institution. And he remembers how on his first day in the temple, Jayananda brings him out to assist preparing a little garden for Srila Prabhupada. This was in LA. So Jayananda was talking to him and goes, things don't always go just right in Krishna consciousness, but you just have to keep on chanting. So at the time, Karandar couldn't imagine what could go wrong, maybe some of you know now sometimes things maybe go a little off key. But he remembered that you just have to keep chanting. And years later, he found himself, he could appreciate the potency of what Jayananda had told him. You just have to keep on chanting, which is very similar to Srila Bhaktivinoda's instructions also. You may be aware of a little poem he's wrote, have to keep chanting, just keep on chanting. So humility was certainly Jayananda's most prominent quality. And it was the real thing. We all know how to act humble. Oh, yes, Prabhu, thank you, Prabhu, even though we may be feeling something else, But we know how to act humble. He was humble. It was not another picture behind the words. And he could not criticize anyone. It was against his nature. Even if a devotee did something that warranted some criticism, Jayananda would usually just say nothing, or else he would just make it appear like it was just some little mistake and perfectly understandable. No matter who was giving class or leading kirtan, he would always appreciate the person. Never spoke Hare Krishna, harsh words, or chastised anybody. And if one devotee was criticizing another devotee within earshot of Jayananda would just quietly leave. He could not tolerate it. Because he knew how to encourage people, the temple leaders would assign the new devotees to work with Jayananda. And really quickly he'd give the new person the feeling that this is where I belong. I belong in this Krishna consciousness. So Jayananda was so expert at fanning any little spark. He'd fan it until it became a big fire. And this was what we experienced with Srila Prabhupada. So he was emulating Srila Prabhupada. Sometimes we're unable to appreciate, the potential of a person. Prabhupada would just fan that spark. So Jayananda picked up on that. There's a interesting story. I have to watch the time. Take a detour and we won't get to the end of my class. But there was this devotee that came, and literally it didn't seem like he did anything except sit and chant and read and read and read and chant. And kind of sat in the hallway with his legs straight out. And this was in Boston. So at the time, Giriraj Brahmachari, who's now Giriraj Maharaj, many of you know him, he was just like, what do we do with this person? So he wrote a letter to Prabhupada, what do we do with this person? Just sitting there. First thing people see when they come in is this fellow sitting there reading and chanting and doesn't do anything else. Prabhupada's brilliant reply was, can't you just tolerate? Years later, Giriraj Swami goes to Los Angeles and he sees this person and he's like, somehow the face is slightly familiar, but he can't place him. And he asks him, who's that person? Oh, by the way, this person who was sitting in the hall, so his name was Peter, and the devotees, with all their generosity, they called him Crazy Peter. It wasn't just Peter Prabhu, it was Crazy Peter Prabhu. So he sees this face and he's like, who is that? And I go, that's Krishna Krata. Oh, so Krishna Krata was an unparalleled, self-taught Sanskrit scholar. And he was translating all the books of the Goswamis that Prabhupada had mentioned in Chaitanya Charitamrita, translating them into English. And he's looking and he realized, oh my God, that was Crazy Peter. He had no clue of the potential of this person, But sometimes we're kind of like that. And Jayananda, he could find the potential, he could bring it out. So it was like a big brother, compassionate always. He was willing to listen to devotees, but actually the devotees very rarely burdened him with their problems. They explained, when you were around Jayananda, suddenly you had no problem. Just like Maharaj Yudhisthira, Jayananda's enemy was never born. So once he wrote, he says, when I reflect upon my consciousness, had I not the association with devotees and Srila Prabhupada, I shudder to imagine the nightmare my life would have been. If we become a little dedicated to distributing the mercy of Krishna consciousness, so many could be saved from suffering. And because of his genuine compassion, Krishna gave Jayananda the unique ability to make people want to serve Krishna, directly or indirectly. And this was particularly evident during Rath Yatra time. So he, had to build these carts, and he would organize a crew of cynics, bloopers. Bloopers are people that, Islam slang, for people that had been connected, even maybe initiated, and then kind of drifted away. Uncooperative personalities, non-devotees off the street. He'd get all these kind of people to help him build these Rath Yatra carts. And many of those fellows, they still needed to have a little, cigarette, so they'd take a break and smoke, and he wouldn't mind, He'd get them to work 10, 12, 14 hours a day, willingly. And he was always glorifying them and others, and himself working equally as hard. In fact, he generally worked harder than anyone else. So all of these qualities made him very inspiring to work with. And one of his other abilities was he had the ability to get almost anything for free. Like the printing, the advertising, etc., for the publicity. And what he couldn't get for free, he'd get at a really good discount. He was like the backbone of the Rath Yatra in the Bay Area for years. And his experience in each one of those were summarized in the 1977 edition, Rath Yatra edition of Back to Godhead. So you can kind of Google 77 Back to Godhead, Rath Yatra edition, and get some really wonderful background stories. And behind the scenes, Jayananda was doing everything in preparation for these festivals. And then after each festival, he would personally take prasadam, cookie and cakes to every single person who helped organize in one way or another. That's including all the officials in the city who had to give their permissions or, assistance to get this program, the Rath Yatra, on the road. He would go and bring them prasadam. And because of his efforts, the devotees to this day in the Bay Area have a very amazingly harmonious relationship with the city officials when it comes to the San Francisco Rath Yatra. So during the weeks before the festival, Jayananda would sleep at the site where the carts were being built. And he would get up every morning, 4 a.m. without fail, even if it meant he only slept, 3 hours or less. And to keep the crew alive, and he had a little tiny gas stove, like a camping stove, and he'd cook up this amazing, prasadam, and on site. And the preparations were carefully offered, and each was just filled with that bhakti. So much so that the temple devotees would sneak down to the cart site to get some of the Jayananda's blissful prasadam, So he regarded the Rath Yatra of 76 in New York City as his most successful. And he described the letter he described this event in a letter to Keshava. So Keshava was another one of the early devotees that firewall service, just lit the fire under others and get things done. So he wrote, somehow I got the good fortune to work on the New York Rath Yatra. It was such an auspicious opportunity. Prabhupada was coming. So this was Prabhupada coming to Haribol, to New York for Rath Yatra. And you can imagine there was a fire in the heart of everyone. And they had got this first-class center in Manhattan, 55th Street, West 50th Street. Prabhupada called it our skyscraper building. And unfortunately, the same person who was successful in getting it had some kind of weird dream that he should sell it, and somehow did that. It was a great loss to the society. Anyways, Prabhupada was coming, they got that building. This building was fantastic because it had, temple room, prasadam room, it had its theater room, it was multi-floors. The whole floor was for a theater, so with a beautiful stage, slope seats, padded seats, it was amazing. I saw one performance there, and you just were it was like the devotees who were doing the dramas in such a setting were just bringing the whole story to life, But the one I saw was really fantastic. It was called The Age of Kali. It was one Prabhupada really liked. Anyways, great setting. And somehow one of the devotees to Srila Krishna got an okay to use Fifth Avenue for the parade route. So we all know Fifth Avenue, big thing. And one other devotee, Jumbavan, was there. They had a couple other boys. Everybody was working really hard. They were going to have 3 carts for the first time in New York. And Jayananda said, I was praying that somehow we'd get the carts finished. And somehow, by Krishna's grace, it worked out. But you wouldn't believe some of the scenes. The night before the festival, something always has to increase attention. So the night before the festival, around 5 or 6 p.m., they were raising Balaram's dome. You know how the canopies come up and down. And just when it reached the top, a huge gust of wind came, caught it, and blew the whole thing over. The framework was all busted, twisted. Jayananda said, I couldn't see how we could rectify the situation, as there was still so much left to do on the other 2 carts. But 2 devotees who were expert builders vowed they'd get it together by tomorrow. I had some extra pipes, some extra tubing, and they worked all night, and by Krishna's grace, all 3 chariots were at 5th Avenue and 59th Street by 6:30 a.m. in the morning for the parade. Jayananda said of Srila Prabhupada, I knew he didn't want to cheat me, so I wanted to work for him. In his dealings with Srila Prabhupada, Jayananda kept his usual low profile. He could have been front and center. He could have sat right in front of Prabhupada at every darshan. Nobody would have blinked. But no, he'd be off working somewhere on some project. And when Prabhupada would come to San Francisco, Prabhupada, where's Jayananda? He would have to ask for him, you know. So the relationship was described as one of old friends. Karanda said very economical, meaning Jayananda didn't go in for long meetings with Srila Prabhupada, even when the other temple leaders were doing so. And by way of reciprocation, Srila Prabhupada would inevitably call for Jayananda when he would arrive in the temple. And sometimes he'd have to make repeated requests. And when Jayananda would finally be located, he'd resist. No, I can't go see him. I'm too dirty. I'm too fallen. You know, one time, he would never wear anything new. He'd go to the Salvation Army, get a pair of overalls for $1. They would always have these that were used. And yeah, like one time, actually it was at the Rath Yatra. Suddenly, you know, he's there, he'd been working in the cart start to start, and he had this BBT sweatshirt that had been, you know, zipped up one that someday he had been given. But because he was always on his back under the cart dealing with the mechanical aspect, it wasn't very clean. And somebody pointed it out, and he goes, oh, and so he took it off and turned it inside out and put it back on. Anyway, his relationship with Prabhupada was one of service. Service to Srila Prabhupada was the core of his life. One time, Dhanavir, now Goswami, asked him, how does one make advancement in Krishna consciousness? And Jayananda very sincerely said, I don't know, I'm too busy to think about it. Think about his own advancement. He was just thinking about serving Prabhupada and the devotees. And Prabhupada wrote to him and appreciated his sincere service. So in December of 75, he wrote, I was very happy to get your recent letter. I'm always thinking of you and praying for Krishna, praying to Krishna for your advancement in Krishna consciousness. Yes, I remember the old days in San Francisco. So that was the old days started in January of 67. This is December 75, so that was the old days. Now we talk about the old days. It's like ancient history. But I remember the old days in San Francisco. Krishna has been so kind upon me to have sent so many sincere disciples to help me push on this movement on behalf of my Guru Maharaj. And then to Jayananda, you continue with your program there in San Francisco. And here's a very instruction that's for all of us, particularly here in Columbus, where we have this really incredible new temple dream coming up. He says, so always strictly keep our principles, and Krishna will bless you with greater and greater realization of the importance of this movement. So I'm dependent upon you, my older disciples, to carry it on. I hope this meets you well. That's very important. You know, we have something we're doing here that's pretty phenomenal. And we can't afford to slack off. We have to be there together, shoulder to shoulder, heart to heart. And we may see something really wonderful happening in this city if we stick to it like that. Just like when we went to London, we didn't know anybody. What did we have? Nothing. But we stuck to it. We stuck it out, shoulder to shoulder. Mutual cooperate, putting any type of, petty grievance aside. No, we have something more important to work towards. And we were, not that we were successful, the success was Prabhupada's. But it can happen here in the same way, by sticking together, Jayananda's final meeting with Srila Prabhupada took place in New York at the Rath Yatra, 76. At the airport arrival, they sent Jayananda to pick him up. Prabhupada got in the back of the car, so he couldn't see who was behind the wheel. So he said, "Who's driving?" Devotee said, "It's Jayananda." "Oh, I know Jayananda." He gave me $5,000 to print my Bhagavad Gita. So Jayananda was not only, like big, he was about 6'4", I think, big, powerful in body, but he was strong in his faith in Krishna consciousness, and therefore nothing could frighten him. And the ultimate expression of Jayananda's fearlessness came at the end of his life, when he was diagnosed with leukemia and cancer of the lymph gland. He never succumbed to fear or self-pity. There was no why me, none of that. When his old friends would come to his room and they'd see this withered form and almost ghostly appearance, they found it hard to talk their way around the condition. But what Jayananda communicated, on the other hand, was complete disinterest in the subject of his health. Instead, he was scheming how to put on the Rath Yatra in Los Angeles, how to help Prabhupada push on this movement. He was sitting in his wheelchair on the lawn. Who described he looked like death personified, but he just couldn't stop thinking about Rath Yatra. He was the epitome of Krishna consciousness, the fearlessness of death. So he pushed on the LA Rath Yatra from his bed, from the wheelchair, until he was so weak he couldn't even pick up the phone to call old friends to ask for donations. And still, he collected a large amount of Lakshmi to devise the various means by which this festival would take place. And the managers of the festival readily admitted without Jayananda's presence, the Rath Yatra would not happen in LA in 1977. He proved by practical example that by engaging in devotional service, one transcends even the fear of death. So the fact that he passed away while Srila Prabhupada was on the planet is not insignificant. In this way, Srila Prabhupada was able to confirm to all of us that everyone should follow the example of Jayananda. So let us offer our humble obeisances unto His Divine Grace Srila Prabhupada and to His Grace Jayananda Prabhu, Jayananda Thakur, the contemporary exemplary teacher of devotional service in Krishna consciousness. Prabhupada ki jai, Jayananda Thakur ki jai. I made it right on time ki jai. I mean, I could go on, but I want to honor their lordship, Shri Radha Vrindavan Nathavar, and their arti. But I think it's really important that we know about the persons. Sometimes we kind of hear there was somebody, but who was there and what did they do for Prabhupada? And it gives us some inspiration. These are contemporary saints, saintly persons, It's great when we hear about previous acharyas 500 years ago, 5,000 years ago, but it's not the same as connecting with somebody with contemporary who we can actually relate to. And then that gives us a boost towards those ancient acharyas, ancient teachers, because we know they're following in their footsteps. Hare Krishna.
Is Vrindavan Priya here to the Kirtan? Vrindavan Priya will do the Kirtan. Vrindavan Priya, is she here?
She's here but not here. She had to get some work done, so she'll be here about 1 or 1:30 because she was driving me around. She's a little behind, so I told her not to worry.